Good evening, good day, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the Ask Abhijit Show, episode 180. I hope you're all doing great. And today I'm going to take questions from the comments that you have posted, and I'm going to take those. So, going forward, every week I'm going to have three live streams for the foreseeable future. One is going to be a live stream in which I take questions from the live chat so that everybody gets to participate. And then I'm going to have two live streams in which I'm going to take questions from the comments. Okay. So let us see who all is there in the live stream. I can see Chirag Avasthi. Hello, I do remember you. Aman Shivastav, Tejas, Pamal Nandi, GK, Swapnil Joshi, Red, Daka Hero, Gakusai, Bernal, Dat Noob Gamer, Advait Singh, Divesh, Mahi Shrestha, Shubh Karman Singh, Asminor, hello. Krishna Rawat, Eritrea, Anvit Singh, Om Bekerikar, hello. Diyosh Pitra, A Dab TU, Gokusai Ji, Jai Guman, Shreyansh, Daka Hero, Divesh, Advit, Anirudh, Dan, Rohan, Geopolitical Dube, hello. Agnibha Mukhopadhyay, Prikshan, Vivek, Mridul, Anvit, Netizen, Lakshmikant, Mehak Verma, Kavya, Pranav, Mahi, Alok, McLovin, hello. That Noob Gamer, I think we spoke about that. Rishikesh, Simple2222, Shri Harsha, Rudraksh Kaul, Akhilesh, Psycho, SG, Surendra Gupta, and lots and lots of other people. Matteo Perez, hello. Pratyush, Palab, Abhi Shorts Video, Pamal Nandi, Gakusai, and so on. Okay. With that done, let us take some questions and take let's see what questions you all have asked. Let's see, where do we begin? Let's begin here by J Akash06, who asks, what are the benefits of the Chabahar port deal with Iran? What are the benefits India will reap? Okay, so let's go straight to the map because this is a map kind of thing. All right, where's the map? Here's the map. So where is this port? It is a port in located in Iran. All right. So we go westwards, and here we have the port of Chabahar over here. This is the port. Okay. And if we were to use the satellite images, you'll find that this port has a couple of terminals, the port of Shahid Beheshti, and there's a different port here as well. Darya Kuchik, Chabahar Port Fishing Harbor, and so on. So India has signed an agreement with Iran, which will enable India to operate one of the terminals in this port, I think the Shahid Beheshti, for a decade, 10 years. Okay, so that is what's come in the news. This happened this past week. So what are the benefits of this for India? I mean, why? I mean, everybody is talking about this. Why is this a big deal? Well, you have to understand it's all about geography. Historically, India's historical borders, they touched on Central Asia and Afghanistan. Afghanistan, the past 500 years, was no longer part of India. So India's borders historically touched Afghanistan and nations like Tajikistan. So that was the border of India, and India could access Central Asia and Eurasia from its borders, from its northern and western borders. Now, after 1947, the so-called Indian leadership of that time allowed the partitioning of India and the creation of an extremely hostile nation called Pakistan, a temporary artificial nation. And the Pakistanis have always had this policy of denying India access to Central Asia, because now the entire access to Central Asia is cut off by Pakistan. And that's a inherently hostile nation as long as it exists. So India no longer has access to Central Asia and to Eurasia, which is a disaster, which is something people in India don't realize at all. We just don't understand geography, because you need access to Central Asia and to Europe, etc., for trade purposes. Look at China's OBOR, One Belt, One Road, the BRI project. They're able to access Europe via land, but India doesn't have any access. India is essentially completely cut off. It's almost like a landlocked country. On the north you have Chinese occupied Tibet, to the west you have Pakistan and Pakistan occupied Kashmir, and in the east you have Burma, which is under civil war kind of situation. So India is completely cut off. The only access India has to other nations is either by air or by sea, and India hasn't really developed its port system and its maritime prowess. So that's the only access India has essentially to the rest of the world is by air or by shipping. So now, if you have a port over here which you control, the Chabahar port, then what you can do is you can bypass Pakistan entirely and send and receive shipments via the west coast, probably from Mumbai and other ports through Chabahar, and then you can send shipments into Afghanistan. You can send shipments into Eurasia. There is the international north-south transport corridor that India is part of, which will connect the port of Mumbai to the port of Baku in Azerbaijan. Where Azerbaijan doesn't have an economy as such; it is entirely dependent on oil, and and we can also connect India to Russia via the international north-south transport corridor and so on. So Chabahar is a port that will facilitate this. It's going to be a patchwork kind of route from Mumbai to Chabahar, or from the west coast of India to Chabahar. You will send stuff and receive stuff by sea through shipping channels, and from Chabahar you can have a rail link to a place called Zahedan over here, and from Zahedan into Afghanistan you can send stuff, and you can also have other routes which will take you to Baku and the Caucasus region, the South Caucasus region, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, etc. And then you have southern Russia over there, and you can also access Europe if you want through this. So that's why it's kind of a game changer for the past 7 8 decades. India has been deprived of its historical traditional access to Central Asia and Eurasia, and now we can depend on Iran and get this done. So it's kind of a long, circuitous kind of route, but at least it kind of restores India's access to Central Asia and Eurasia via Iran, which is why India will have to depend on Iran for this. Now, why would Iran do such a thing? Well, it also gives Iran options, right? Uh, Iran already has a strategic agreement with China. Iran has good relations with Russia, and this is a transshipment route that will eventually connect India with Russia as well. So it all works out to every nation's benefit. Not very well for China, but definitely for India and Iran and Russia and various other nations that are connected through this. So these are the benefits of the Chabahar port deal for India. It essentially restores India's historical access to Central Asia and Europe after a gap of almost eight or so decades. So that's why it's important. It's good for the Indian economy. India is a rising economy. India is a growing economy. India, in the next couple of years, will become a $5 trillion economy. India wants to be the manufacturing hub of the world. To have that, you need extremely good and resilient and reliable supply chains and trade routes, and diverse supply chains and trade routes. So by doing this, India ensures that it has multiple options of by which it can send shipments to various parts of the world. And that's why it is important for India. Okay, next question is by Dhanush. Thoughts on Putin's visit to China? How should India see this development, given that Russia is India's biggest arms supplier? Would Russia side with China in the event of an India-China conflict by stopping arms to India? Okay, that's an interesting question. So Putin has recently visited China. He went to China, and I'm sure he's back to Moscow by now. And Mr. Putin chose China as the first place that he would visit after his recent election victory. So that kind of gives you an idea of the kind of importance that Mr. Putin gives to his nation's relationship with China, and his personal relationship with Xi Jinping. So Mr. Putin visited China. He brought along his economic advisor, and various economic officials, and maybe some military officials as well, defense officials. So the relationship between Russia and China right now is all about the economy and military and defense and a bit of trade. And there's a significant asymmetry between Russia and China these days when it comes to the economy and the trade. So China is a much larger economy compared to Russia. Russia economically is not even in the top 10 nations. Russia obviously is the second most powerful military nation, especially when you consider its gigantic nuclear weapons arsenal and the delivery systems it has, and the kind of reach it has across Eurasia because of its inherent size. So Russia is has the upper hand militarily. China has the significantly upper hand economically. When it comes to the two nations and the trade, uh, about a third of Russia's trade is with China. But when it comes to China, only about 4% of its trade is with Russia. So there's a massive asymmetry there. So historically, Russia used to be the USSR used to be the senior partner. China was the junior partner. Then you had the Sino-Soviet split, which began in the what 50s, 60s, 70s. It became very much official essentially in the 70s. But the relationship between Russia and China has never been better since the Sino-Soviet split, and now the roles are kind of reversed. Russia is the senior partner, especially economically, and the West has sought to isolate Mr. Putin, isolate Russia economically by launching bucket loads of sanctions on Russia. So Russia depends more on China these days, and China uses that as a massive leverage to extract concessions from Russia. So China overall has the upper hand, and Russia needs China more than China needs Russia, and that's why you can see that Mr. Putin, his language, his demeanor, etc., was very conciliatory, very that sort of thing when he was in Beijing, and Mr. Xi Jinping was more of the, you could say, big brother kind of, he had adopted the big brother kind of role. So you can see the dynamic between the two nations, it has kind of reversed in the past 10, 15 years, right? Now the question you're asking, the danger always from Russia's perspective is that it becomes a vassal of China, and that is something they do obviously do not want. Russia, the dependence is bad for Russia, the dependence on China. And China supplies Russia. Russia supplies China with crude materials, essential commodities, raw materials, oil, gas, petroleum, whatever else. And China supplies Russia with finished products, you know, drone engines and washing machines and whatnot. Okay, that's the kind of relationship the two countries have. And this dominance that China has currently in the relationship, it's not good for Russia, and I'm sure Mr. Putin doesn't like it. But right now, there are few options, especially given the war in Ukraine and the West's attempts to isolate Russia. So the danger is that Russia becomes a vassal of China, and that is something which can only be offset if Russia has some other options. Russia needs options apart from China, and one of the options is India. So Russia has now become probably India's largest supplier of oil, and that is good for Russia because it tells you that it means Russia has options apart from China. And overall, if you look at Eurasia, especially Eastern Eurasia, which means Asia, the only nation in Asia that can actually counterbalance China, apart from Russia, is India, and that's why India is important for Russia. So to ensure that China doesn't just ride roughshod over everybody, the only nation that can counterbalance China to some extent is India, and India is growing. India's economy is growing. If it keeps growing for 20 years, it can be a genuine threat from the Chinese perspective. The way they see it, they see everything as a threat. So Russia sees its relationship with India also with a great deal of importance. Now the question is, if there's a war between India and China, what will Russia do? First of all, the West will most likely not come to India's aid, as I've explained in a previous video. They'll try and extract concessions and use that as leverage against India. What will Russia do? Well, Russia also is not in a position right now to intervene and you know intervene militarily, especially take India's side against China and go and do anything against China militarily. That's not in Russia's interests. So, if there's a war between India and China, Russia will urge restraint and say that please go back to the negotiating table and settle your differences there. And I do not see, well, the Chinese will certainly try and uh, coerce Russia, let's say, into stopping arms supplies to India. That is certainly something that will happen. The Chinese will try and do that. So then the pressure will be on Russia because Russia does want India. Russia kind of wants the status quo the way it is right now. China, India, Russia, the kind of relationship is there, trilateral relationship. Russia is okay with that. Russia doesn't want the relationship to get to change too much. Uh, So if China fights a war with India, and if Russia believes that India may be defeated, then it will certainly not want that to happen. Uh, so the pressure will be on Russia as to what it does. The Chinese will say, stop sending all arms, whatever you're sending to India, stop it entirely. What does Russia do? I think Russia will need to demonstrate some fortitude and some independence in such a scenario, because it is in Russia's interest that India does well against China, and India is not, defeated by China. So these are all hypotheticals, but yeah, it will. If such a thing happens, it's going to be a big test of Russia's fortitude and independence. Pankaj Bora says, is India much worthy to claim a permanent seat in the United Nations? And if not, what should India's future steps be for this? And also, what's your view on China's military activity around Taiwan? Is it a trailer before a full war? Okay, so is India worthy to claim to put its case forth for a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council? Well, let's look at the makeup of the United Nations Security Council, the five permanent members. Okay, let's see who they are. The US, the sole superpower. Secondly, there's Russia, which is a near superpower militarily, but economically not that powerful. Thirdly, you have China, which is a gigantic economy, but not clearly as powerful militarily as Russia or the US. So these three nations make sense, the three most powerful nations, let's say. Hard power. Then you have a nation like France, and you have a nation like the UK. What is the UK? I'll tell you what the UK is. Okay. The UK is a poor third rate nation attached to London. The real economy of the UK is London. London is the global money laundering hub, and you could say the financial capital of Europe, one of the major financial outposts and hubs of the Western Empire. And so London is what really matters, and the rest of the nation is a poor third rate nation attached to London. And it no longer has any geopolitical pretensions. It's not even a second rate geopolitical power, it's a third rate geopolitical power. It doesn't even have control, the UK, over its own nuclear weapons, okay, which are mated to American ballistic missiles, which means that the big red button isn't in London with Mr. Rishi Sunak. It's probably somewhere in Washington DC, somewhere around that place. So the UK doesn't really belong in the United Nations Security Council. What about France? Well, France again is a member of NATO, which means it's not entirely sovereign. NATO has pooled sovereignty, which means some of your national sovereignty goes out of your hands, and it becomes the domain of the NATO High Command. So France obviously doesn't like this. It's the only nation in NATO that has a quasi-independent foreign policy. I've said this so many times. But economically, it's not that big. It does have some power projection ability because of its colonial possessions in the Indian Ocean region, and its influence over certain parts of France, especially certain parts of Africa, especially northern and western Africa. But overall, you could say it's a has-been kind of nation. Okay, much of its wealth still is extracted out of Africa and so on. So when it comes to the UK and France, they don't really belong in the UN Security Council, given their current status, the current state of their power, their economy, the military, and overall hard power. Not really. And India's economy is larger than that of France and of the UK. And India is a rising geopolitical power. India dominates the Indian Ocean region. I think India deserves a place in the UN Security Council much more than the UK or France. I mean, the world has changed. It's no longer 1945, but the UN Security Council is a snapshot of the world order as it was in 1945. So I think India should keep on reminding the world that it is an injustice and a travesty that India is not a permanent member of the UN Security Council. Keep on reiterating this at every occasion, but don't worry too much about it, because the UN is becoming more and more irrelevant. Okay, it's obviously lost a lot of respect. So what India needs to do, future steps, is just keep on growing your economy. And as your economy grows, your military might grows, and work on the power projection abilities, which means you need a powerful navy. You need to invest in the navy. in distributed lethality over a wide surface area of the Indian Ocean region. That's what India needs to do. Keep working assiduously on this day in and day out. And in the next 5 years, it will be a different story. In 10 years, it will be a much more different story. That's what India needs to do. Now, what's my view on China's military activity around Taiwan? Is it a trailer before a full war? Okay, let's take a look at the Chinese military activity. So we're talking about the South China Sea, which historically was called the Champa Sea, and the East China Sea, or whatever that is, and the Philippine Sea. All of this. So China claims the whole of the South China Sea via the 9 or 10 or 11 or whatever dash line they have of late. And there's a lot of military activity around Taiwan. So China essentially has encircled Taiwan via its navy. China has a very extensive navy, numerically the largest navy in the world in terms of numbers, and China repeatedly transgresses around upon Taiwan's territorial uh, airspace via its fighter planes and bombers and whatnot. So that is something that's become very normal. China has completely normalized these activities. Military naval exercises around Taiwan and the transgression into Taiwanese airspace via Chinese Air Force assets. That's completely normal, and it's a routine occurrence every week, almost every day. This is something that goes on. So, yeah, that is the situation when it comes to Taiwan. Is this a trailer before a full war? That remains to be seen. Okay. So it is believed that Xi Jinping, when he came to power, he had given. So he came to power, I believe, in 2012, if I'm not mistaken. And it is believed that he had given the armed forces of China 15 years. So he had given them a deadline of 2027, by when they need to be completely, fully, 100% ready to undertake an invasion of Taiwan on demand. So we're in 2024, 2027 is 3 years away. So, what is the state of affairs? The Chinese now have a second aircraft carrier that they are testing out, second or third, whichever it is. The Liaoning was there, and so they're testing out a new super carrier, 80,000 ton aircraft carrier, which is kind of comparable to the 100,000 ton US aircraft carriers. So you could say it's the first world class aircraft carrier they have, a super carrier kind of category, and they are testing it out. So, are they ready to to undertake and prosecute a successful invasion and conquest of Taiwan? Well, only they would know. They would know the full assessment of their capabilities. But if they invade Taiwan, they will need to fight the US and Japan and South Korea at the same time. Okay, so it is a very big undertaking, and are they ready? We don't know. Only Xi Jinping and his people know. And yeah, but one thing is clear, that Taiwan is soon going to face an existential crisis, an existential event in its history, probably in the second half of the 2020s, and if not then in in the first half of the 2030s. That's going to happen sooner or later, unless China undergoes some drastic decline that we have not foreseen. Okay, Preetham Sharma says, why is China and various other central banks, why are they buying huge amounts of gold? Is there a connection to the US dollar losing its value and possibly replace the US dollar with gold and other commodities? Yeah, so lots of central banks, lots of nations have been purchasing gold. India has been doing that. China is purchasing tremendous amounts of gold. Uh, I think China has been purchasing large amounts of gold the past 16, 17 months. Almost every month, they're spending $1 billion or so on gold. And yeah, so what does it mean? China is not only stocking up on gold, it is stockpiling all kinds of essential commodities like oil and iron ore and copper and cobalt and various rare earths and whatnot. Everything you can imagine. Nuclear weapons, haha, grain or and food materials. China is stockpiling everything. So when does somebody stockpile stuff in this manner? Remember the horrible days of the 2020s, early 2020s, 2020, 21, 22, the pandemic, the lockdowns. Everybody has gone through this. You would stockpile all non-perishable food items. You would stockpile tinned foods. You know, I mean, depending on where you are, in the West, in the US, people were stockpiling tons of toilet paper. So when you're stockpiling, it indicates your mindset that you feel like you're under siege, and you feel like it's a very abnormal situation out there, and the future could be dangerous and bad. That's when you stockpile stuff. So why is China stockpiling everything? It could indicate that they may be preparing for war when it comes to, well, the only war. What are the possible wars that China could fight? One is an invasion of Taiwan. Second is take conquer various Philippine islands and Japanese islands in the South and East China Sea. That's the second war China could fight. And the third war it could fight could be with India in the Himalayas. So it's either India, it's either the South and East China Sea versus Philippines and Japan, or it's Taiwan. So these are the three possibilities. Which one is correct? We don't know. But yes, it's not just China, it's many other nations that are stockpiling various kinds of things, especially gold. So there is always the fear when it comes to any responsible nation that it's very well known that the US dollar is a paper currency, it's a fiat currency, it doesn't have any real value. The only strength that the US dollar has, it depends entirely on the US military strength and the US ability to project power across the world. And that is the only thing that keeps the US dollar the world's reserve currency. So, yeah, I mean, it is always good to take precautions. Okay. And yeah, obviously, if you have significant reserves of gold, it means that your currency also has some actual value that backs it up. So these are the reasons why you're doing this. And there's always the danger of future economic shocks and economic downturn. The global economy isn't doing very well. Lots of nations in a, are entering a phase of recession or near recession. Economic growth globally is stagnant and sluggish. India is the only bright spot out there, but India also has to take precautions. So yeah, that is the global overall scenario right now. Okay, Balian says, is the Indian government somewhere under the influence of the Chinese government? The reality apparently is that we have lost our land near the LAC, but the government did nothing except giving speeches. Sir, it looks like you have been listening to certain YouTubers. Yes, India has lost land, but at what time near the LAC? India lost land in the 1950s and 1960s, especially in 1962. That's when Mr. Nehru did not take care of the Indian national security and defense, and India ended up giving lots of land, Aksai Chin and other parts of the northern territories to China. So that is something that happened during the time of Mr. Nehru, and then later on there was this policy, this absurd policy of the Indian governments, several governments after Mr. Nehru, to not develop any infrastructure in the northern border regions, and the Chinese kept on relentlessly developing infrastructure, which gave them a significant advantage, and that is something we are trying to offset now with our infrastructure building efforts. So after 62, also the Chinese kept on salami slicing away at Indian territory, inch by inch by inch, maybe sometimes a foot or two here and there, maybe sometimes a kilometer. So yes, land has been lost, but not during the time of Mr. Narendra Modi. But if you watch certain YouTubers and certain such people, well, you're gonna end up believing this. You see, and you will recall that it's after Mr. Modi came to power that the Chinese so-called People's Liberation Army started clashing with the Indian army in the border regions. Why was that? Because now, for the first time, the Indian armed forces were given the liberty to push back against China and not, give in to Chinese provocations. And India started building significant amounts of border infrastructure. You go up there in the north, you will see that the Border Roads Organization (BRO) is active day and night, whether it is good weather or terrible weather, whether it's snowing or freezing, they are active day and night. They're building infrastructure on a 24-hour, 365 days basis. And that is what has rattled China. That's why you had the Doklam incident. That's why you had the various other incidents, the Galwan incident, various clashes that are happening. It's because India is pushing back. So whatever land India has lost was lost before Mr. Modi's government came to power. But that is something, and the political parties that are responsible for this are trying to create a narrative where it looks like this land was lost because of Mr. Modi, when it happened before Mr. Modi ever came to power in Delhi. So, but yes, that's the narrative that certain YouTubers and certain individuals and political parties and all are trying to create, that we are losing land in the north, in the LSC, and the government is doing nothing except giving speeches. You have to understand what the reality is. All right. Okay, Harshil Agarwal, nice display picture. Okay, the question is, how did the US allow its European vassals to join the BRI, the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative project initially? Okay, so when it comes to the European nations, Central Asian nations, there are about 35 nations that were or are part of the Chinese BRI. A whole bunch of these are in the Central Asia region, the Caucasus region. You have Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, nations like Azerbaijan. This is mainly Central Asia and the Caucasus region, right? And then you have a whole bunch of Eastern European nations or Caucasus nations like Armenia, like Belarus, like Albania, Bosnia Herzegovina, Bulgaria, Moldova, Montenegro, Russia, Romania, Czech Republic, Turkey, Ukraine, etc. That are members of who have joined the Belt and Road Initiative. Turkey is a member of NATO, which is kind of, you could say, a proper US vassal, but Serbia is not a US vassal. Moldova is not a US vassal. Hungary, well, Czech Republic, Bulgaria, not really very much. Bosnia Herzegovina, well, it depends, right? Slovenia, Russia, is Russia a US vassal? Uh, and so on. When it comes to the actual Western European nations, EU nations, Austria is a member of the BRI, and less important nations like, well, with all due respect, Cyprus, Greece, Luxembourg, North Macedonia, Italy has pulled out of the BRI. They have withdrawn from the BRI, and that was announced by Madame Meloni after the G20 summit in Delhi. So it's not really like there's a whole lot of EU members that have joined the BRI, and it's not like there's a whole lot of NATO members that have joined the BRI. The only exception I would say is Turkey and probably Austria. Austria is a member of NATO. Greece is a member of NATO. Yeah, Greece is a member of NATO. So that's just a couple of nations. And overall, these nations are not going to sell out their national interest or the interest of, of NATO or the EU to China. It's about gaining and accruing benefits rather than giving any real anything really genuine or significant in return. And it's also good to have your own people in the enemy camp sometimes, right? So yeah, overall, that's what the deal has been. It's not like the Chinese have taken over these nations or anything. Most of these nations are members of the BRI only in name. There's not really been any real infrastructure development in, say, as many of these. I mean, one example is Pakistan. What happened to the CPEC, China Pakistan Economic Corridor? Some of it was built, some of the projects were abandoned, and right now it's completely, well, nothing's happening. So there you have it. Yeah. Okay, Rodrajit Sarkar says, why did the US and its satellite states allow German reunification to happen in 1990, despite knowing how a unified Germany made their life hell in the two world wars? Well, you have to understand that after 1945, Germany became a nation that was entirely, I mean, West Germany. See, what happened in 1945 is that Germany was partitioned, okay? The eastern half, the eastern portion, not half, the eastern portion map. We have to show the map. Where's the map? Okay, let's take a look at the map of Germany. So Germany is in Europe. Europe, yes. This is Germany. So in 1945, what happened is that Germany was partitioned. The eastern portion became, well, a member of the Soviet satellite states, and the western portion became a member of the US satellite states. So the eastern portion was under Soviet occupation, you could say, and the western portion was under US occupation. Now, when it comes to West Germany, its constitution was written under the supervision of the US. Not a single word was such that the US would be unhappy with it. So essentially, the whole nation is under US military occupation. You still have US military bases on German territory, and the nation, it's the situation is very similar to that of Japan. Similar but dissimilar. There are differences, but overall, Germany is under the same status. Uh, Even today, it's under US military occupation, permanent US military occupation. So that was a situation in the early 90s when the Berlin Wall came down and the downfall of the USSR happened. So then what happened is that the US got the chance to grab even East Germany. and make it a region under its occupation. So why would you not do that? It's not like Germany is an independent nation with independent foreign policy and independent economic policy and an independent military policy. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. They are completely under the control of the US, whether you realize it or not. So the US got the opportunity to expand its power projection eastwards by by incorporating East Germany and into West Germany and reunifying the nation. So it gave the US a larger area which it could control completely. And then we know that we had the eastward expansion of NATO, the relentless eastward expansion of NATO, which eventually culminated in the current war that's going on in Ukraine. So that's why the Americans were perfectly fine with this. The satellite state of the US have no say in what the US does, by the way. Okay. It's only the US that decides what happens. So that's why the US was very happy with Germany reunification. Germany is not an independent autonomous nation by any means. Look at the kind of immigration that's been happening in Germany. Yeah. You think any truly independent German government or chancellor would allow this sort of immigration to happen? Unchecked immigration from God knows what nations, only military age males who have no respect or liking for German culture. Yeah, so you see that's the deal. So yeah, the US worries about the prospect of a strong Germany. It constantly worries about that. I mean, Germany is firmly under their control, but you cannot. It's hard to shake off the memory of those Hugo Boss uniforms and those marching boots. So it makes sense to weaken Germany, and you can see the weakening of Germany. Germany is giving up on its nuclear reactors. It's now firing up its coal power plants. The Nord Stream pipeline has been sabotaged. Germany no longer gets the cheap gas it was getting from Russia, which is why Germany has gone into a recession and so on. So yes, Germany is getting weakened. The demographics will be further, let's say, destabilized with the influx of random immigrants, not random, very specifically targeted immigrants from West Asia as well as Africa. So, yeah, well, so Germany is totally under control and there's no threat. Eventually, there'll be no threat left in Germany, sadly, from the German perspective. Okay, this is a long question. Priyanka Taneja says, there's something I find hard to understand. Just like we in India want to and are attempting to isolate Pakistan, being the state sponsor of terrorism, and expect the other nations to understand our predicament vis a vis Pakistan and engage with them accordingly. Israel too is the victim of terrorism at the hands of Iran sponsored proxies and expects other countries, including India, to deal with Iran in an appropriate way. After considering our zero tolerance towards terrorism and talks can't go hand in hand. Why do we treat Iran like a normal nation and wish to streamline our relationship with it? I understand we have our interest in circumventing Pakistan to get access to Afghanistan and Central Asia, but being the state sponsors of terrorism, why don't we treat Iran the same way as we treat Pakistan? When we expect others to have zero tolerance towards terrorism, why do we support a nation that unleashes terror on others? Okay, so the assumption behind this question is that Iran is a genuine state sponsor of terrorism, right? So Iran is our neighboring country. Well, not right now, temporarily not, but yes, historically our neighboring nation. Now, let's talk about terrorism. What is terrorism? Terrorism is what India has experienced for several decades. Pakistan unleashed terrorism on India. And let's remember who financed and funded the terrorism. It was the United States for several decades. We know what happened in Kashmir, the exodus of the Kashmiri native Hindus who are still living like as refugees in other parts of India, right? So that also happened through US sponsored Pakistani terrorism. So we know what Pakistani terrorism is like. We know what terrorism is like. Now, when somebody makes the claim that Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism, please, I would like to know where where are those Iranian suicide bombers? Where are those Iranian terrorists? We know what Pakistani terrorists look like. We have seen so many of them. You know, they end up flat on their faces on the streets with a, traumatic damage on their body when they eventually meet the Indian armed forces. We know what terrorism looks like. We know what Pakistani terrorists look like. We know what ISIS terrorists look like. We know what Al Qaeda terrorists look like. Where are those Iranian terrorists? And where are they doing those suicide bombings and whatever else? And in which nation are they doing it? You know, The problem is that the entire media is controlled by the West, and that's why they can label any nation a state sponsor of this or that. Okay, so Iran is just like any self-respecting nation that has ambitions, geopolitical ambitions, seeks to uh, expand its power projection abilities, which means that it leverages the assets that it has developed in Iraq. Doesn't mean that these are terrorist attacks or terrorist assets. It has assets and it has a good relationship with the nation of Syria. It has a good relationship with Russia, with Yemen, and so on. And when Iran plays the game of geopolitical power projection, the Americans will label that as having terrorist proxies. When the Americans use ISIS against the nation of Syria, those are what do they call them? Moderate rebels. When the US employs Al Qaeda to fight the Syrian government and unleash hell on the people, on the Yazidis and whatnot, including ISIS, those are moderate rebels. When the whole nation of Iraq is devastated, more than 1 million people die under the bombs. Well, that is liberation. It's democracy. We have to understand what terrorism really is, and is Iran really a terrorist nation? And then we have to understand that every nation has its own interests, and the one job of the leader and the government of a nation is to further your nation's national interests. That is all it is. And this is something we were taught by our, well, not sure he was everyone's ancestor, but Mr. Chanakya, Vishnugupta Chanakya. He taught us this, and it is part of our heritage. So we should remember that. The world is not a very nice place. The world is a harsh place. It's a cutthroat world. Every nation looks out for itself. Think of the global geopolitical scene as a big fish tank in which you have thousands of fish, different kinds of fish. Some fish will join together and work together. Other fish will be too large and they will try to eat them and so on. So it's constant cooperation and competition. It's simply the law of the jungle. That's how geopolitics works. Okay. And every nation, whoever is the leader, has only one job: you serve your nation and your people. So when it comes to the leader of India, his job is to serve the people of India and the nation of India, and that's all. And sometimes you may have to let me give you an example. How many of you remember that a few years ago, the daughter of the Sultan of Dubai, the Amir of Dubai, whatever his name is, the daughter, her name was not, okay, I forget the name of the lady. She escaped from Dubai by via boat or yacht or something, and she wanted to take refuge in India. Okay, and she was her ship was of her yacht was off the coast of Goa. So the Sultan of Dubai calls up Mr. Modi, says that I am facing this problem. My daughter has run away, and it's a terrible embarrassment to me and my family. Can you please do something about it? Okay, and this lady, the princess, she apparently, it seems that her father was very cruel to her and she wanted to escape, and she thought that India will give her shelter. And what Mr. Modi did was that he asked the Indian Coast Guard to intercept this vessel, take the lady into custody, and repatriate her back to her father. Okay, so that's what Mr. Modi did. Now it is entirely possible, I don't know, that maybe she was right and maybe she wanted to flee from her nation and get refuge elsewhere. But when it comes to the national interest, we want to have good relations with our friends in the UAE. And when such a request comes in, you accede to the request. I'm sure it's sad for that lady. I sometimes I would say it's sad for her. I feel so sorry for her. But what Mr. Modi did was in his own nation's interest, and that was obviously a considerable fillip to the relationship between India and the UAE and Dubai, and in a week or two later, the Dubai extradited a known terrorist back to India. Okay, so that's how it works. So you have to put your nation's interest first. I do not believe that Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism as the West claims, and and Iran has done absolutely nothing to hurt India's national interests. It's actually the US that is hurting India's national interest by prohibiting India from buying Iranian gas and oil. I mean, Iran is right next door. Imagine how much cheaper it will be to get oil just from Iran. But no, we can't do it because of the US sanctions and US threats and arm twisting. So I don't see Iran as a state sponsor of terrorism. Iran is not a terrorist nation in any way compared to the way Pakistan is. And India has to look out for its own interests. And people will say that why is India cooperative with the Taliban? The Taliban are so harsh on their women. It's not my problem. Okay, and it's not the problem of the Indian leadership and in the Indian government. What happens in Afghanistan inside there is their own business. It's none of our business. If their people have a problem with the Taliban and the way it is governing the nation, they can take it up with the Taliban leadership. If the ladies and the girls of Afghanistan are unhappy, they should go and talk to the leaders of the country. But we, as a nation, sovereign nation, will deal with Afghanistan as a different, as another sovereign nation, in a mutually beneficial manner. And same goes with Iran. So we have to understand that we have to be realistic and pragmatic in international relations. There is no place for morality and ethics. The only morality of a king is that his kingdom and its people should prosper. So yeah, that's how it is. uh, Iran, from our perspective, is a normal nation. It is a nation with which we want to have good relations, and I do not see Iran as a state sponsor of terrorism, despite whatever the Western media claims and various Western nations claim. Okay, Rodrajit Sarkar says, why did the Vietnamese liberate Cambodia from the hands of Pol Pot? What were their interests? Okay, let's go back to the map. Where is Cambodia, my dear friends? Oh, the map has already adjusted itself. So we know where we are. India, yes. Let's go eastwards. We cross the Sea of Kalinga. We go eastwards, and then we have Suvarna Bhumi, which is Thailand. And you go east of Suvarna Bhumi, you have Cambodia. And this entire region, Southeast Asia, was once very, 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 very Indianized. They were all Hindus, and some of them later became Buddhists. And even today, you see more of our culture there. They're in India. They are more culturally Indian than us Indians. Anyway, that's a different story. Why am I talking about that? Okay, Cambodia. So what happened in Cambodia? I think it was in the mid 70s that the Khmer Rouge, the Red Khmers, a Marxist communist organization supported by China. These guys, they fought a civil war in Cambodia and they took over the nation. The capital city of Phnom Penh fell to the Khmer Rouge, and then these people, they unleashed a horrific wave of terror and genocide on their own people. They emptied all the cities. They forced everybody to go out into the countryside and do forced labor. There were brutal executions. I mean, I don't even want to talk about it. Okay, how bad it was. And you will see this reaction from me because as a kid, I was in a barber shop one day as a kid. I don't know, 10 years old or something. Okay, in Europe. And when you are waiting in a barber shop for your turn, there are magazines around there. There's this magazine sitting there, and I pick up the magazine, I open it, and there's these pictures of the countryside of Cambodia in the aftermath of the Vietnamese liberation of the nation. And my goodness, the images there of the dead people, ah, horrific for a kid to see. So what the Khmer Rouge did was they killed off, I don't know how many million, 2 million, 3 million of their own people in the most horrific ways, the most atrocious, the most cruel ways. Now, the Khmer Rouge was a proxy of China. You see, the Chinese, was the Khmer Rouge not a genocidal terrorist organization? It was entirely supported by China. It was a proxy of China. People, we believe that Iran, some of us believe that Iran is a state sponsor of terrorism and all that. I mean, what about China? Iran is not, China is. Anyway, so the Khmer Rouge was a proxy of China. Okay. Now, what was happening was that they took over the whole of the nation of Cambodia. And then they were also attacking Vietnamese villages across the border. And there was this big influx of refugees who were desperately fleeing from the Khmer Rouge. And these refugees would spill over either into Thailand or into Vietnam. Okay. So Vietnam eventually got fed up. Okay, especially because the Khmer Rouge were violating the border and the sovereignty of the nation and attacking Vietnamese villages and so on. So eventually, what they did was that they launched air raids and they sent the army across the border. And over time, They liberated Cambodia from the Khmer Rouge, and Vietnam were supported, by the way, by the USSR. So this invasion or liberation of Cambodia by Vietnam happened, I think, in 1979. All right. So Vietnam was supported by the USSR, and Cambodia was supported by China. I mean, the Khmer Rouge terrorists, genocidal evil people, were supported by China. So this was an extension of the Sino-Soviet split. China and the USSR had become kind of enemies, especially after the 1969 Ussuri River clashes, and then the eventual opening up of China to the US. So China became a US proxy, you could say, for some time, and obviously the USSR did not like that, and this spilled over into this region in Southeast Asia. So Vietnam was pro USSR, supported by the USSR, and the Khmer Rouge were supported by China. So the Vietnamese army prevailed. They kicked the Khmer Rouge out, and the Khmer Rouge retreated into the jungles and so on. And Cambodia became a socialist communist country called Kampuchea. And it was called Kampuchea until I think the early 1990s or something. And then Mr. Hun Sen came to power, and well, long story. So Vietnam had these interests. It was also kind of, you could say, a spilling over of the China USSR rivalry into the Southeast Asian region. And in response for Vietnam destroying the government of the pro China Khmer Rouge, the Chinese decided to teach Vietnam a lesson, and they invaded Vietnam from the north in 1979 or 1980, somewhere around that time. And the Vietnamese defeated China. The Chinese lost to Vietnam. So the last time the Chinese tried to invade another nation, they were beaten and defeated by a small nation called Vietnam. There you have it. Sundar Gupta says, what's your view on Sam Pitroda's comments that Indians look like Arab, white, Chinese, Africans? This individual, Mr. Pitroda, he was once a big deal somehow in India. He was the advisor to very powerful people. I think in the 1980s and 90s or something around that time. And he still seems to have delusions of grandeur of some kind. So what did Mr. Pitroda say? He said that Indians from the west part of India, they look like Arabs. North Indians from northern India, they look like white people. People from eastern India look Chinese. And people from southern India look African. That's what Mr. Pitroda claimed. So using that logic, I would be an Arab. Yeah. Do I look Arabic, by the way? So I would be an Arab. Mr. Gandhi, Mr. Mohandas Gandhi apparently was Arab. Mr. What? Not Mohandas. Mohammed Jinnah was also an Arab apparently. Imran Khan, what is he? He's a white man. Who else? Who else is a white man? Can you think of any other North Indian people? Who are the famous North Indians? So I am like Zero says here, Habibi Abhijit. North Indians. Who are the famous North Indians in India? Mr. Nehru. Oh, Mr. Nehru was a white man. Kangana Ranaut is a white lady. Okay, so Mr. Nehru was a white man. Miss Kangana Ranaut is a white lady. Who else do we have? Then down south, who Mr. Muralidharan is African apparently. Yeah, Mr. Ravichandran Ashwin is African. Who else did we have in South India? I can't think of any right now. And according to Mr. Pitroda, Mr. Bose, Subhash Chandra Bose was what? Chinese? Are you kidding me, Mr. Pitroda? Seriously? Mr. Kalam, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, what was he? African? Are you kidding me? I just don't get these people who make these ridiculous comments, irresponsible comments. So, yeah, good to take this question. It introduces a bit of hilarity and levity in this in this episode. Okay, next question. This is by Happy Faces 228. Why do most historians think that humans became civilized from hunter-gatherers to crop cultivators just around 10,000 BC? Also, they can't go beyond 1,500 BC when it comes to history. How can human history be so short? How can we evolve so rapidly? Human civilization should be tens of thousands of years old. I'll tell you what, these historians that we are referring to over here, well, who wrote all the history? Today, you have historians in India, you have historians in other countries, but the groundwork, the foundation of the history which they use is all by European historians. It was all written by European historians. And whatever they wrote in the 18th, 19th, 20th century, that is taken as self evident. And that's the entire foundation of all historical research and writing that happens today. And if you disagree with that, then you are regarded as what? As a crackpot, a conspiracy theorist, or whatever. So all of this history was written by Europeans, by the West. It's all Eurocentric history. And the problem is that in Europe, there was no history essentially before 1500 BC. It all starts with, well, the Mediterranean region, Greece. And even when Greece was emerging as a civilization, the rest of Europe was what? Hunter gatherers, living in caves, eating wild animals, living in trees. Is true. I don't lie. You see, so European history begins around 1500 BC. So then they want to force fit that on everybody else, because the inconvenient truth is that India has a history that goes back at least 10,000 years. China has a history that goes back 4,000 years. Africa, we don't even know what their history is because it's been totally destroyed. The Native Americans, the Olmecs, the Mayas, the Aztecs, and whoever else, the Chimu, the Moche, they had the civilizations that went back thousands of years. It's the Europeans who are the youngest and the latest, the last to become somewhat civilized. So they want to force fit that time period, that chronology on everybody else. That nobody dare be civilized before 1500 BC. That's what they do. If you look at various monumental pieces of monumental architecture, there is a Göbekli Tepe in Anatolia, currently part of Turkey for some time. So if you go to Göbekli Tepe, it's believed to be about 10 goes back to about 10,000 BC or 8,000 BC, whatever, 10,000, 11,000 years old. And that clearly is, oh, that site, that archaeological site, it clearly served some kind of religious purpose, and it was like not a small site at all. So it was clearly intelligent, evolved people. They understood architecture. They had some understanding of science, at least a little bit, and clearly more advanced than the Europeans of 1500 BC. Is true. So yeah, so that's why they don't want to recognize this. Now, when it comes to not just Gobekli Tepe, right? Uh, okay, where's map? Where is map? We should see map. So here is map. Even in India, if you go, so in Tamil Nadu, where is Puducherry? Puducherry, and south of Puducherry, there is where's that little village? I must find it. Okay. Okay, somewhere south of Puducherry, there is off the coast of Tamil Nadu. Uh, Archaeologists have discovered a giant underwater city. Okay, probably Kaveri Pumpattanam of the Sangam literature era, and that city is at a depth that indicates that it was last above water about 10,000 years ago. 10,000 years ago. Okay, that's in the east of India, off the coast. Now, when it comes to the west coast of India, we have Dwarka. We know that there is an underwater city of Dwarka, and that also dates back about 8-10,000 years. And when it comes to the Gulf of Khambat archaeological complex, it's a whole complex of multiple cities that are all under the ocean. Okay, and they were last above the ocean about 10-12,000 years ago. So that tells you how ancient Indian civilization is. The problem is that India's archaeologists seem to be working hand in glove with these anti-India elements in the historical academic fraternity, and they are ensuring that they don't excavate this and they don't throw light on the antiquity of Indian civilization. So I'll tell you what, you are absolutely right. Happy Faces 228, that the human history is very ancient. It's not just 1500 BC that civilization emerged. It's not just 10,000 BC that agriculture evolved. We know that India had agriculture 17,000 years ago. It is known, it is demonstrated, it is proven. I don't have the sources right now. Look it up. Look it up. Okay, this is homework for you. For those who say that I don't bring sources, I'm doing a live stream over here. I'm taking questions on the fly. I cannot show you all the sources, otherwise half my time will go in doing that. Do some due diligence, do some homework, find your own sources. I'm telling you what sources exist. Okay, Indian agriculture is at least 17,000 years old minimum, and much more. So all these claims, all these narratives, they serve certain purpose to put forth the Eurocentric and Euro supremacist version of history. Okay, Priyanka Taneja says, could you please shed some light on the curse of the pharaohs, especially Tutankhamun, and the mystery that revolves around the death of the excavators who unearthed his tomb? Please share your insights. So Tutankhamun is one of these Egyptian kings, Egyptian pharaohs. I believe his tomb was unearthed and discovered in the valley. Let's go to the map. Uh, Always nice to see the map and discover new places. So this is Al Qaira, Cairo. And where is the Valley of the Kings? Let's just search for the Valley of the Kings, Luxor, Misr, and let's zoom in. Let's go. Here we go. Whoopsie daisy. Okay, apparently it is here. Valley of the Kings. Okay, this is down south. Wow. There's got to be a different Valley of the Kings. Anyway, the point is this. Okay, let's not spend too much time discovering the Valley of the Kings. The point is that the tomb of King Tutankhamun was discovered sometime in the 1920s. If my memory serves me right, 1921 or 22. And the guy, the archaeologist who discovered this tomb, was a guy called Howard Carter. He was most likely British. Okay. And this narrative was created in the media to sensationalize the discovery that there was apparently some inscription on the tomb which contained a curse, that anyone who opens the tomb will be cursed and whatnot. And there was this overall narrative that was already going around that Egyptian mummies are cursed, and there are spells, magical spells or whatever, on these mummies, and whoever opens mummies will meet an untimely end. That sort of narrative was there. So that is the so-called curse of the pharaohs, but actually there was no inscription such as that on the tomb. And uh, so then the question is, what happened? Did people actually mysteriously die, the excavators who unearthed his tomb? So over time people died. Some people who were present over there died a year or two later. Some people took longer. Howard Carter did not die until the 1930s, so he's the main guy. So why did he not die if there was a curse on the tomb? So that's a great example of the fact that this story is obviously not true. Yeah, the guy, the main archaeologist who opened the tomb and who was behind the entire archaeological expedition, he lived for more than a decade, almost a decade and a half after the excavation of the tomb. The guy who financed the expedition, I think he died a year or two later, but I don't think he was there when the tomb was opened. So, people eventually die. So it doesn't mean that it's connected to some mysterious curse. The simplest example, the starkest example is Howard Carter, who did not die for the next 15 years after opening the tomb. So yeah. Harshil Agarwal says, is the whole dating of our civilization incorrect? Was it done to match the timelines of the Aryan tourism theory? Because the Rig Veda cannot be 1.5 thousand BC. Come on, what is that? Because of its detail and explanation about the Saraswati River, it must be beyond 5000 BC at least. What are your thoughts on this? So, yes, I agree. Look, it's a straightforward, logical thing. The Rig Veda has numerous references to the Saraswati River, in which the river is depicted and described as a loudly roaring river and the mother of floods and much more. Okay, the most glorious of rivers, the greatest of rivers, and so on. So clearly, it was the largest river in the Indian subcontinent at the time. Now we know where it flowed. I mean, we have satellite imagery and all that tells you where the river once flowed. It is now, it no longer exists. Sadly, Saraswati ji has left us, maybe because we stopped studying too much. But the river, the great river, originated in the Himalayas. It was a In the north, it was a glacial meltwater fed river. In the south, it was as it moved southwards, it became a rain fed river. At the time, the Indian rainy season was much more, uh, much heavier than what it is today. And the great river drained out into the run of Kutch somewhere over here. And if you look at you know maps of the bottom of the ocean, of the topology of the undersea, of the undersea topology of the planet, you will see the drainage channel of the Saraswati in Western India. So it's still there. It was that massive. So we know it was there, and now it no longer exists except in the north, where it does turn up during the monsoon. It is now called the Ghaggar Hakra River in the north, somewhere in the Haryana region. But yeah, it no longer flows down south. It Because of the decline of the Indian monsoon, it stopped existing. Now the Rig Veda mentions the Saraswati, I don't know how many dozens of times, maybe more than 100 times, and it is praised as the greatest of rivers. And we know that the Indian monsoon started declining slowly, monotonically, from 6000 BC onwards. So 8000 years ago, the decline of the river begins, and we know that it dried out in the southern part of India around 1500 BC. So the decline lasted about 4,500 years. Okay, that's how long it took for the river to genuinely dry out. It was a very slow decline. Now, in the Ramayana, the Saraswati is mentioned as a great river. In the Mahabharata, the Saraswati is mentioned as a river that's drying out. So there's a significant time difference between the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. So the Mahabharata would have happened closer to 1500 BC than to 6000 BC. In the Mahabharata, in the Ramayana would have happened closer to 6000 BC than to 1500 BC. And the Mahabharata would have happened closer to 1500 BC than to 6000 BC. And the Rig Veda clearly predates the Ramayana, by the way. That is known. That is the chronology. So, what that tells you is that the Rig Veda was written closer to 6000 BC and definitely before the Ramayana. So then this entire dating of the Aryans starting their picnic in India in 1500 BC, and then after a century or two they write the Rig Veda, okay, in Western India around 1300 BC. That is such utter nonsense. It is deliberately constructed to force fit certain dates on top of Indian history, which doesn't work. And then there are so many other problems with Indian history, the dating of Indian history. There are multiple kings called Chandragupta. Okay, now we know that the Greeks, the Macedonians, when they tried to invade India, they uh, Alexander's invasion of India. At that time, we had the Nanda dynasty, and the Greeks then mentioned a ruler called Sandrakottos, which is one of the Chandragupta rulers. But how do we know it is Chandragupta Maurya? Beyond conjecture and speculation, we don't have any hard evidence that the Chandragupta that the Greeks referred to was Chandragupta Maurya and not some other Chandragupta. There were multiple Chandraguptas, just like there were multiple Vikramaदिtyas. So these are the problems. So it's quite possible that our chronology is fatally incorrect, fatally flawed. And maybe so. Mr. Vedvir Arya has done significant research on India's true chronology, and he has a whole different chronology of India. And I have done a podcast with him. Maybe you want to check it out if you're interested in this topic. So I think we need to revisit the entire chronology of Indian history a priori once again from scratch. I'm not very certain about the date of the Buddha and Mahavir and Shankaracharya and the Mauryan era. It could all be 1,000 years or more before what we believe it is, because all the whatever we believe is based on the opinions of certain historians, but there is no hard evidence. We do have Mauryan era archaeological sites and relics and all that, but you cannot carbon date stone. You can't, right? That's why it's very hard to date a temple or date an archaeological monument, in a architectural monument. You can't. How do you date it? How do you date stone? Carbon dating. Carbon dating can only be done on anything that contains organic matter. Bones is a good example. Bones, you can carbon date bones, and you can even extract DNA if you're lucky, and so on. But stone doesn't contain organic matter. So how do you carbon date stone? Yes, sometimes you will find that under a stone there is something left, and maybe you it was organic matter from that time. That's something you can assume, but it doesn't prove anything. So I think the point is the entire chronology of India's history will have to be re-examined, and a lot of what we believe may be completely mistaken and incorrect. Saurabh Bhadoria says, is cultural inferiority the reason for colonialism, or is it because of colonialism that cultural inferiority has been created among the ones is created among those who were colonized? Well, India is a great example. India is full of mentally colonized people. I am one of them because I am more comfortable using the English language than native Indian languages because of, well, because of the way I was raised and the way I grew up and the exposure and all that. So I am not in a minority. Most Indians are mentally colonized to various degrees. At least I am proud of my history and my ancestry. Ancestry is in all of us, our ancestry, right? And our history and our great civilization. I'm at least proud of that. Many Indians are ashamed of that. They don't like it. They believe that everything that came from outside is better and India is all that. So that is the mental colonization. That is the inferiority complex that lots of Indians have. Lots of Indians have this inferiority complex. Now, the question that's asked over here by Saurabh is a good question. This inferiority complex, is it the reason why you become colonized? So, do you become colonized because you have an inferiority complex, or is colonization the process that creates the inferiority complex? So, let me explain. You don't get colonized because you have an inferiority complex. You get colonized because you are militarily inferior or tactically or strategically inferior. That's how you come under foreign occupation. And then the colonization starts. Colonization means extraction of resources outside of your country, essentially beggaring you in the process and enriching them at your expense. That's colonization. That is standard European Christian colonization. Okay. Yeah. It had a religious component. The religion was used to justify the colonization because non Christians were, well, they deserved to be enslaved. And then so the process was that the popes would give a bull which would allow these colonizers to go and grab any nation and take over the land of any nation whose people are not Christians. So you take the land, you enslave the people, you extract everything out of value out of the place, and then as an act of mercy you give them the choice that you convert or die or you become slaves. So then if you succeed in converting these people, then what happens is that, yeah, you have done something good. So colonization was for a good purpose. Yeah. So that's the whole justification. Very, yeah. So, so colonization happens if you are militarily inferior or strategically or tactically inferior, or if you have poor leadership despite being a strong economy. Or if you are politically disunited, okay, politically fragmented as a nation or a civilization. So yeah, India faced these problems mainly because of a lack of political unity when the invasions happened, the Turkic invasions and so on, and then the European invasion, Christian invasion. So, colonization is not because of inferiority complex. It is because of these issues. But then colonization, once the colonization happens, what happens is that your standards of living decline, your nation descends into abject poverty, and then they destroy your indigenous education system. They impose a foreign language on you, and then they teach you that you are all inferior, and the reason you are poor is because you people are inferior, not because we stole all your wealth and destroyed all your infrastructure and all your industries. So the inferiority complex is created after colonization by the colonizers to justify colonization and to prevent the natives who are being oppressed and subjugated and destroyed from rising up in rebellion. They will be made to think that, yeah, we deserve it. We are so inferior. The great white people have come to save us. We should try and be more like them. That's how it goes. Jaideep Raithatta says, why did any Indian trust a political party, the INC, established by a British person, Alan Hume? How can an Indian rely on it for getting independence? Were there any wise men in India at the time of independence who knew the reality of the Congress and opposed it? Well, Mr. Subhash Chandra Bose, He was no longer a congressman. Mr. Gandhi was no longer a congressman in 1946, 1947, 1948. I think Mr. Gandhi resigned from the primary membership of the Congress Party in the 1930s, sometime in the 1930s. Was it 1934, 36, somewhere around that time, maybe before that. Now, the main question is, why did Indians trust a political party that was created by the British? So, first of all, why did the British create this party? The British were aware that Indians had this desire for independence, for freedom from these foreign occupiers and oppressors. 1857 was a great example of what could have happened. The British faced this tremendous outpouring of anger. The whole nation went to war against them, and they somehow were able to suppress this. And in 1857, they destroyed every single royal family that stood against them, wiped them out, and then put puppets in their place. Puppets in their place. Okay, then and those puppets, their descendants still rule. I mean, still are recognized as so-called whatever. Yeah. So what the British did, what Alan Hume, this guy did, is that he created a political party, the Indian National Congress, or whatever it was called that day. Those days, I think it was called that. And this political party, the objective was that it will become the movement that will channel the energy of the Indian independence movement, and it will be channeled in the right ways. No violence, no no real opposition of the British. All the leaders of this movement should be British educated, English educated Anglophiles whose first language is English more than any native language. Hmm? Most of them should have been educated in England, have a degree from England, and so on. And that's what you see in everyone except for Mr. Patel. And Mr. Patel was a die-hard loyalist of Mr. Gandhi, who was a British educated lawyer. Okay, so that was the purpose of this political party, to take the to first of all, it would be positioned as the only legitimate avenue for the Indian independence movement. Anybody who fought for Indian independence outside of this political party would be labeled as an extremist. I mean, I believe they called Bhagat Singh an extremist and a terrorist, right? So anybody who was not part of the Indian movement, independence movement, through this party was either an extremist or a terrorist, and they were treated horribly. They were all hanged and tortured and whatnot. And so that was it. So the objective was to make it appear to Indians that there is a political party that is taking care of our aspirations. A completely artificial, non-grassroots political party. Can you think of any more recent political party like that? I'm just saying. I'm not saying anything. so so it was a fake freedom movement that was designed to delay independence for India. Okay, that's what it was. Now, in those days, there was no social media. In those days, the entire press was controlled by the British, so you could not write anything that was too critical of the British. In that, you could, sometimes pretend to be slightly anti-British, but not too much. So the entire press was controlled with an iron fist by the British. There was no TV. The radio still wasn't there, I believe. Maybe it was there, but it was very rudimentary. And for most Indians, a radio was as expensive as buying. Most Indians could not afford it. There was no electricity in India, by the way, those days. So nobody knew about radio. You would have one radio in every city, medium-sized city, no radios in villages. Obviously, there was no TV, there was no internet, there was no Geo, there was no Vodafone, there was nothing. So the narrative could be controlled. You could spread any narrative you wanted. You could say through the media and whatnot that this is the legitimate political party that will achieve independence for India whenever India deserves it, and so on. So that's how it was done. So the wise, I'm sure there were wise people who could see through it, but who knew them? They would never be allowed to come up. They would be marginalized, and if they spoke too much, they would be taken care of. That's the kind of India it was. It was not a free India. It was India under foreign occupation, worse than the Nazis. These Anglos were worse than the Nazis, by the way. Maybe, but you don't know it. You don't realize it because your textbooks extol their virtues to the high heavens. So yeah, so that's the whole deal. That's why Indians trusted such political parties, and Indians are still so gullible even today that despite the age of social media, despite all the facts being there in front of you, many Indians still vote for certain fake political parties that serve other nations' agenda, and they still believe utter nonsense and lies and propaganda by certain YouTubers and whatnot. So, what can I say? Even today, Indians haven't grown up. Many, not all. Some of you are very wise. Those who watch me, thank you. Okay, Madhavan Vinod says, how did so much linguistic diversity develop in Papua New Guinea? More than 1,000 languages on both sides of the island. And why do we not find such diversity in India? Good, interesting question. Let's go to the map. Where is Papua New Guinea? It is to the east of India. So we go east, 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 east. And north of Australia, you have Papua New Guinea. So, and there is there is a straight line over here, and to the west you have Indonesian administered territory, and to the east you have the nation of Papua New Guinea. But the entire island is the homeland of the Papuan people. Okay, it's a very large island, very rich in natural resources, etc., etc. And like Vinod says, more than 1,000 languages are spoken on the island. So if you look at the topography and all that of the island, you'll see that there are mountain ranges. So there's a mountain range over here. If you go to the three-dimensional view, it's not really mountains, it's hills. You have hills and you have forests. It's a completely green island. There are very few actual cities. The only city of any kind of any size in the east of the island is Port Moresby, which itself is kind of a glorified village. Okay, and they're all today in the east converted to Christianity, as far as I know. Most of them, some of them who are still isolated may have their own whatever culture they have. So the deal is this: these people, the Papuan people, are, well, what one would call less developed people. They all lived in the form of isolated tribes, isolated from each other for centuries, sometimes in various parts of the island. Small tribes, 100 or two, maybe 200. Some of them would be 50 strong. Some of them could be larger. So they never had kingdoms, they never had empires, they never had civilization the way we know civilization. They all lived in tribal groups, isolated in remote parts of the island. It's a very large island, the population density is very low. So because of these reasons, so many different languages evolved independently in isolation from each other, even though the people are genetically very alike. But you keep people up, two tribal groups apart for 200 years, they're going to speak languages that become divergent over time. So that's the deal. When it comes to India is a whole different kind of thing. uh, India, first of all, we know the history of India. Very large population. Even 5,000 years ago, India had a population of about 5 million, the largest population density in the world, even during the Indus, Harappan, Saraswati, Sindhu phase of our history and all. And something about Indians, we were, well, well developed, I guess. We had uh, we had cities, we had urban development, even 5 6,000 years ago during the Saraswati Sindhu phase. So we are a different culture and different civilization. The Papuans have a whole different history, and we also have so many different dialects. I mean, if you go to various parts of India, you have various language families, but every district has a slightly different way of speaking whatever language they speak and all. So you can see something like that in India also. But India was much more interconnected. Even 5,000 years ago, India was interconnected with highways and roads and all that, the way Papua was not. So there was constant exchange, interchange of language, of culture, of customs, of traditions, of stories, of people, of goods, services, so on and so forth across India, which is why India evolved as as a single civilization, despite having lots of different dialects and languages and lots of different local customs. Okay, Lakshdeep Bhutak says, I follow you since your first post on Chinggis Khan. Thank you so much. That's been a while. I want to ask you about King Bhoj. Who was King Bhoj? King Bhoj. So King Bhoj was Raja Bhoj. We talk about Raja Bhoj. He was a very significant king. In the first half, he ruled the region of present day Madhya Pradesh in the first half of the 11th century. So it's 1000 AD to 1050 AD, around that time. Okay, the exact dates may be slightly off, but he ruled central India, mostly the region of present day Madhya Pradesh, about 1,000 or so years ago. He was a very prominent king of the Parmar dynasty, a Rajput dynasty. Okay, the Parmars. And he is remembered for his tremendous contributions to culture, to literature, architecture, and his reign is considered to be a golden age for his kingdom and for that entire region, that entire part of India. And he was very strong militarily. He conducted multiple campaigns, successful campaigns to expand and consolidate his kingdom. His administration was very effective governance. Uh, People had high levels of prosperity, very good living standards. He constructed many temples, magnificent temples in his kingdom. The Bhojeshwar temple in Bhojpur. Bhojpur is named after Raja Bhoj, obviously. So the Bhojeshwar temple is a great example. It is dedicated to Lord Shiva. Um, what else? Founded the city of Bhojpur, which was his capital. Then he established the Bhojshala, center of learning, also a temple of goddess Saraswati. Well, Bhojshala is, yeah, it's under a cloud right now, whatever is left of it. But he constructed that. He was a patron of many scholars and poets and artists, and this brought about a renaissance kind of environment, a very vibrant cultural environment. It is said that he was a scholar who wrote books on various subjects like poetry, philosophy, astronomy, and all that. And so, overall, a great king. He is remembered as, one could say, an ideal king. A very just, very wise king, an ideal king, a patron of all everything that is good. So he left a very lasting impact on India's culture and history, and that's why he is remembered with great fondness today. So that is Raja Bhoj in brief. Priyanka Taneja says, "How do nations decide on their capital city? What factors do they consider?" Um, Look, usually capital cities come. It's not like you are the king of a country and then you sit down and think to yourself, okay, I need a capital, so let me take a look at all the cities in the country, in my kingdom, and which of these cities is ideally suited for being a capital. It's not like that. It doesn't happen like that. What typically happens is that a new dynasty comes up in some part of the country. Let's take a look at India. Okay, this is India. So some dynasty emerges from somewhere. Okay, for example, uh, the Maurya dynasty emerged from Patliputra. And so Patliputra became the capital of the Maurya dynasty. Then the Gupta dynasty also emerged from the same city of Patliputra. So Patliputra, because it was the seat of the early Gupta dynasty, it remained the capital. Now, when it comes to somebody like Kanishka, who had a much larger empire, uh, he had two capitals. One was, I believe, Mathura, was it? And the other was Purushpur, Pushklavati, which is present day Peshawar, where there is nothing left of the original culture. So I think capital cities become capitals because of various circumstances of history, not because they are the ideal city to be a capital. When it comes to, let's say, a nation like Turkey, well, historically, the most prominent city was Constantinople, now called Istanbul, right? So it was the seat of the Ottoman sultans, the caliphs. But when Mustafa Kemal Ataturk deposed, I mean, he abolished the caliphate, the Ottoman Empire, and he fought the Turkish War of Independence, which happened before the abolition of the caliphate. He chose a new capital for himself, for the nation, Ankara, in the middle of Anatolia. So, yeah, it was a smart choice. A city which was at the time kind of in the middle of nowhere. Anatolia was a very dry, desolate, it still is, kind of region. But he chose a city here, and maybe it was a good choice, a city in the middle of the nation, kind of in the middle of the nation as opposed to being on the fringes of the nation. When it comes to Iran, its historical capital was Parshvapur, Persepolis, which is destroyed, and now it is Tehran. I don't remember how Tehran became the capital. China has had multiple capitals, by the way. Beijing was not always the capital of China. It had other cities. Xi'an was a capital, and other cities were also capitals of China. So typically, a capital city becomes a capital because it was the original seat of a small dynasty that went on to rule the whole country. But when it comes to India, maybe it's time to think of a new capital city. So our capital city, New Delhi. It's an ancient city, very ancient city. It is Khandavprastha, Indraprastha of the Pandava era, of the Mahabharat era. It was also the capital of Prithviraj Chauhan and Raja Vikramaditya, the last Hindu king of India, of all of India, of Delhi at least, and so on. But we have had various capitals. We have had Patliputra. We have had Mathura, wherever it is. Mathura is over here. Which other cities were capitals of India? Uh, Peshawar, yes, during Kanishka's time, and so on. So if you look at the map of India, the ideal place for having a capital city is probably somewhere in Madhya Pradesh. The heart of India. Currently, the city of Delhi, the current capital of Delhi, it's barely about what? It's barely 300, 400 kilometers from Chinese occupied Tibet, which is not a very good thing. So ideally, we should have a capital maybe in Madhya Pradesh or maybe somewhere further south. But yeah, let's see if that ever happens. Okay, Happy Faces 228 says, I don't understand how people can forcefully be converted from one religion to another. Invaders can destroy temples, but how can they decide whom people worship? Okay, yeah. Once the invaders are gone, people will again switch their religion. Please explain. That's an interesting phenomenon you're referring to. Okay, let's take one of the examples. Okay, the occupation of Goa by the Portuguese. So let's once again go to the map. As we know, the Portuguese ruled Goa. They occupied Goa for quite some time until the 1960s or something, when we threw them out eventually. So when they took over this region, the Portuguese were the most brutal of the Christian invaders and occupiers of India, European Christian occupiers of India, the most brutal. So this fellow Xavier, okay, who was considered a saint today, he ordered an inquisition in Goa. So when the Portuguese took possession of this region, they destroyed all the Hindu temples, and lots of people had to take the vigrahas and the shivlings, etc., and go down south and escape with those things. And all of those temples are either in ruins or they've been replaced by churches. And then they forcibly converted the people who lived in these regions, and those who secretly practiced Hinduism despite being officially converted, they were executed, they were tortured, they were burned alive. There was an inquisition and all kinds of horrific, cruel atrocities. So people initially resisted. They tried to secretly practice Hinduism, their ancestral faith, but they were brutally suppressed, repressed, and all kinds of horrific atrocities were done. There was this pillar somewhere in Goa where hundreds of hands would chopped off hands would be displayed. The hands of those who were practicing Hinduism in secret. So through this relentless brutality, the Portuguese were able to convert the majority of the people of Goa to Christianity by complete forcefully. Okay, but if you go to Goa today, the people, you know, many people in Goa are more Portuguese than the Portuguese today. Okay, so that's how it happens. So you convert them, and then you teach them the language and the customs, and then your education system is also religious in nature, which means that the children are indoctrinated in this religion and this belief from their very first days, from the days when they can first start speaking. And then this brainwashing continues generation after generation, and after a few generations they are more Portuguese than the Portuguese, despite what was done to their ancestors. That's just one example. There are other religions also that do this. So that's how it happens. So you capture the education system, you capture the religious system, you capture all the books. Okay, you gain complete control over the entire narrative, and then you can make people believe whatever they want, or whatever you want. And I know for a fact that most of these descendants of these people in Goa, they know what happened to their ancestors, but they're okay with it. Which is, I don't know what sort of inferiority complex that is, but it is what it is. Indians are famous for their inferiority complex. Okay. Moody Krish says the recent excavations in Vadnagar, Gujarat have revealed the presence of civilized metropolitan cities in the post Harappan phase. Does this discovery debunk the so called post dark phase in post Harappan history? Okay, what is this so called dark phase? So, you know, the Saraswati Sindhu phase of Indian history, the so called Harappan civilization or Indus Valley civilization, uh, mainstream historians will tell you, and most of your textbooks will tell you, that there was this great civilization there, which somehow mysteriously vanished, probably because the so-called invading Aryans came and destroyed it. And then there was 1,000 years of complete darkness in which there was no civilized activity, because the Aryans were still nomads and they were still getting used to civilized life. And that's the narrative that you have. Okay. So apparently, these great cities, Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, Rakhigarhi, Kalibangan, and so on and so forth, all of these suddenly were abandoned because of the invasion or the migration of the Aryans, and everything was destroyed, and then the civilization disappears. The truth is that the civilization never disappeared. What happened was that there was a climate change event in India which lasted centuries and centuries. And there was also a period of extended drought, which kind of exacerbated the migration away from these cities. And we know that the great river Saraswati dried out because of climate change, because of the decline in the Indian rainy season, the monsoon, over several thousand years. So there was this climate change which necessitated the moving away of people from these big cities for a variety of reasons. And they moved to other parts of India. Some of them went westwards. Where is the map? Here's the map. So then you had various places even west of the Saraswati Sindhu region, Sapta Sindhu region, where these people went and settled. But most of them went eastwards and into various parts of the Indian subcontinent. Some of them went west, some of them went north, but most of them went eastwards in towards more fertile and plentiful parts of the Indian subcontinent. That's what happened. So this was a process that took about 1,000 years of the migration of the people of these regions, of these great cities, to other parts of India. It was a slow process of 1,000 years, and the cities gradually fell into disuse, and the people they built new cities elsewhere. So the more you excavate, the more you will discover this. And these new excavations in Vadnagar and other places have demonstrated that there was no dark period or dark phase. It was a gradual migration of people to other parts of India. That's all it was. And there are thousands of Saraswati Sindhu era cities and archaeological sites, thousands of them that have never been touched archaeologically, that have never been examined. So that needs to happen. Then we will actually know what really happened. Okay, Saurabh Badoria says, what is Taoism? When was it started? Was it influenced by Bharat? As it seems philosophically similar to Indian dharmic thoughts like Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and so on. Taoism. Taoism is also called Taoism, right? It's a philosophical and religious tradition from China. It originated in China maybe about 2,000 or so years ago. China is about 3,000 years old as a civilization, maybe 3,500 years old. So Taoism originated about 2,000 years ago in China. And Tao means the path, the right way, the way. So the teachings of Taoism are about the right way of living, the right path. It's about you have to live in harmony with Tao, which is the fundamental principle that underlies and harmonizes and unifies the universe. So it's about living in harmony with Tao. That's what it is. And there are these principles like yin and yang, the balance of this and that. That's what Taoism is about. It is kind of an atheistic system. There is no divinity or God in Taoism. Hinduism is very different. Hindu dharma, Bodh dharma, Jaina dharma, the whatever dharmic paths we have, they are very different. There's a wide range of beliefs. The concept of Brahman, the ultimate reality, the 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 concept of karma, birth, rebirth, dharma, moksha, all these things, devotion, bhakti, knowledge, jnana, righteous action, all of these are part of Hinduism. Also Buddhism, you have the four noble truths and the eightfold path to attain nirvana, enlightenment, which is also there in Hinduism, and so on. So that is Buddhism. Hinduism. Taoism is about the Taoism also has meditation. It has Tai Chi, Qigong, various rituals aimed at harmonizing you with the Tao and achieving spiritual balance and all that. Hinduism, we also have meditation. We have various kinds of meditation. We have yoga, we have puja, we have tirthas, pilgrimages. Buddhism also has very similar things. So there are certain similarities and all. But in the case of Taoism, there is no divinity. There is no God. Some Taoists will worship certain deities and spirits like ancestor worship, nature worship. Some of them will do it, but most of them do not do it. Hinduism is polytheistic, vast pantheon of gods. Buddhism is kind of non-theistic, but when it comes to Mahayana Buddhism, they also have bodhisattvas and various divinities. So overall, Taoism is more of an atheistic system. It is all about balance and harmony and the right path. Tao. It's about qigong and tai chi and meditation. So in some ways it is kind of similar to Indian practices, but in some ways it is quite different. Philosophically, also some similarities and some differences. All right. Okay. Rodrajit says, why didn't the USA ever see a military coup d'etat? And Sabir Kazi says, why is the US so efficient, effective, and consistent with policies, even though it's a democracy? What should India learn from the US? Is the US a democracy? We know India is a democracy. We have thousands of political parties. Every election, you have hundreds of political parties standing, uh, vying for the seats in whatever, whether it's a municipal election or district election or state election or general election, central election. You have thousands of political parties. It's a complete chaotic, messy festival of democracy. That is Indian democracy. That is genuine democracy. There are parties for everything. Every single minority, majority, every religion, every religious denomination, everybody has a political party of their own. Every region has its multiple political parties. That is genuine democracy. In the US, you have two political parties. You have more, but those don't matter. If you look at the Congress, if you look at the House of Representatives, if you look at the various representative houses of various states in the US, there's only representation of two political parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. So the US, even though it calls itself a democracy, is actually a two-party system, a two-party state, which is one step above a one-party state like China and North Korea. And when it comes to these two parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, they have the same foreign policy, and they're all in bed with the oligarchs, the military-industrial complex, and various billionaires and whatnot. So the US is an autocracy masquerading as a democracy. It's a police state. The US is a police state. There are so many cops everywhere. You go to New York City and just open your eyes for a change and look around and see how many cops you'll see. And I guarantee this, whether it's New York City, whether it's San Francisco, whether it's Los Angeles, or whichever big city in the US, you take those cops away for half an hour, there's going to be riots on the streets. So the US is a police state. It's a militaristic state. Everybody has guns. There are more guns than people in the US. And it has just two political parties which have the same foreign policy. So it's essentially an autocracy, a military police state masquerading as a democracy. That's why it's so effective, consistent with policies and all that. And that's why it's actually an empire, masquerading as a superpower, right? And that's why there's no coup d'etat, because it is so tightly controlled. So there you have it. So what can India learn from the US? Learn hypocrisy, learn how to fool the world. Yeah, it's a good skill to have. Harshil Agarwal says, please discuss the history of Central Asia in brief, like the Shakas, the Kushanas, the Huns, and the Turkic invasions, how they started and when they started in the region. Okay, Central Asia. Where's Central Asia? Where's the map? So we know where India is. Historically, the Indian subcontinent was, I mean, India was larger. Afghanistan and Pakistan were part of India. India's borders during the time of Shri Chinggis Khan, the border of Afghanistan with Tajikistan, that was the border of India with Central Asia. Okay. Um, Now, Central Asia, for the longest time, for about 2000 years or so, was called Scythia. So you had these Indo-Iranian people in this region who were, look, there are multiple, there are records of multiple waves of migration out of India in the past 10,000 years, starting with the Battle of the Ten Kings. So there were lots of Indian origin kingdoms thousands of years in the past in the Central Asian region. Then they eventually went their own way and developed their own customs and rituals and language and whatnot. And the Scythians were these people. The Scythians, they were nomadic people who ruled this entire vast steppe, the Central Asian region, and they were polytheistic people who worshipped the sun and other gods, and they spoke what is today classified as an Iranian language. I would say Indo-Iranian or whatever, and they re-invaded India and reconquered India about 2000 or so years ago, and they very harmoniously assimilated with the Indian population. Today, nobody knows who's a descendant of Scythians because, well, they were genetically very similar to Indians and culturally and linguistically also very similar to Indians. So there was a very harmonious assimilation of the Scythians with the Indians about 2000 years ago, and the various Scythian dynasties ruled India for until about 1500 years ago, including the northern satraps and the western Mahakshatrapas and so on. So that is the Scythians. And if you look at the Caucasus region today, well, people there also have Scythian ancestry. There are lots of people all across Central Asia and Eastern Europe, etc., who have Scythian ancestry. This region, the European part of Turkey, was historically called Thrace, and Thrace and all this Bulgaria, Romania, etc. That was also regions ruled by Scythians. Even Ukraine, the much of Ukraine, all the way up to present day Xinjiang, where you had the Kushans, who were also, you could say, the easternmost Scythians. So that is about the Scythians. The Kushans were, like I said, you can consider them to be the easternmost Scythians. They are probably closely related to the Tarim river basin people, the Tarim river mummy people, who look European in nature, but if you look at their culture, it was very Indian. And if you look at the genetics, it is R1A1A among the Tarim river mummies. So even though they look kind of European with blonde hair and red hair and all that, genetically they were yeah, interesting. And the Kushans were probably closely related to the Tarim river basin people. And the Kushans also ruled India for a few centuries, and they also assimilated very harmoniously with the Indian population, which means that they were culturally, genetically quite alike, quite very much like the Indians. And Kanishka was one of our greatest emperors who did more for spreading Indian culture worldwide than almost anybody else. So that is the Kushans. And the Huns were these tribal nomadic people who emerged out of the region of present day Mongolia, more or less. And then they defeated the Scythians at various points in time, and they ruled over Central Asia sometime in the past 16, 1700 years. And they were the Huns eventually were the ancestors of the Turks as well as the Mongols. Even today, the Mongolian word for human being is who, which kind of comes from who. I think it's Hunnu, and so on. And the Turkic invasions started in this region with the Hunnic invasions, and the Huns were trying to invade India at the same time when they were trying to invade Rome as well. So they can see how far apart they were, how far widely they were spread out. The Huns, very powerful nomadic confederations, raiders and tribes people, and they tried to invade India during the Gupta era, and our emperor Skandagupta repelled wave after wave after wave of Hunnic invasion, which depleted his treasury and his financial resources. Eventually, the Gupta Empire declined, and the Huns were able to conquer parts of India. And the Huns also assimilated very harmoniously with the Indian population. So there you have it: Shakas, Kushans, as well as Huns, and the Turkic people were the descendants of the Huns, and they eventually adopted a foreign religion, the religion of the Arabs, Islam. Okay, Aniket says Universe 25 experiment. The Universe 25 experiment was this experiment with rats, I believe. It was conducted by an American researcher in the 1960s, 1970s. It was about the effect of population density on behavior of rats, of rat communities. So, what happens when you have a rat community in a closed environment, very good environment with abundant, unlimited food and every resource? But what happens when there is a growth in the population? What happens when there is overpopulation? How does it affect the behavior and the social structures of these animal rat communities? Okay, so there was this enclosed habitat, a large enclosed habitat with four rooms or something. It was called Universe 25, and it had mice or rats, I think mice. And these mice were provided unlimited food, unlimited water, nesting materials, whatever other resources mice need to thrive. So initially, a population of I think 25 mice. I don't know how many. uh, Initially a small population was introduced in this habitat. Okay, they were all healthy, they were all disease free, they were all pretty happy mice, and the conditions were very ideal for them to prosper and thrive and be happy. Ample space, ample resources. So what this did is that it caused rapid population growth. So there is rapid population growth and there is prosperity because everything is there. Mice populations double about every 50 days or so. 50, 60 days the mice population doubles. So initially, they all exhibited normal social behaviors. They formed territories, they formed social groupings, they raised their young successfully. But then what happens is that the population kept on rising, the population density kept on rising, and then you saw signs of stress and discomfort, and then the behavior started changing. The social hierarchies that are inherent in every society, human or animal, these social hierarchies started changing and they started breaking down. There was a collapse of social structures, and there was a collapse of normal behavior patterns. Aggressive behavior started dominating, antisocial behavior started dominating, violence, cannibalism, infanticide, infant mortality went through the roof. The mice, okay, more than 90% of infants started dying because the mice became withdrawn, isolated. They refused to engage in normal activities, they refused to mate, they refused to build nests, and all kinds of weirdness you saw. And then the birth rate started plummeting precipitously, and the population started declining. Mortality rates went to the roof because of neglect of infants and violence among all these uh, various mice. So despite having abundant resources, abundant food, abundant water, the population started declining. Eventually the population collapsed and almost went extinct. So what this tells you is that it's not enough to be prosperous. Okay, and this is something that applies even to human societies. Okay, it is kind of speculative obviously, but the overcrowding and the overcrowding was a very big factor in this matter. Despite having abundant food, abundant water, abundant resources, whatever you want, there was overcrowding, and they were all confined in this city like environment. They could not go out of that. Okay, and there was the absence of any danger. There were no predators, there were no challenges, so they all became complacent, and it was very unnatural. uh, it was a very unnatural situation to be in. So when you have overpopulation, when you have high density living conditions, even if you have prosperity, even if you have abundant resources, your social structures break down, your behavior breaks down. There is stress, there is mental health problems, there is a breakdown of social order, there is a decline in uh, birth rates, there is an increase in mortality, and so on. So this could be relevant to humans also. So it's a very, you could say, significant, it's a groundbreaking experiment that was conducted in the 1960s or 70s about social psychology, about the potential consequences of overpopulation. And one could say that there is some applicability of this to human beings as well. So that's the Universe 25 experiment. Okay, two questions. Rodrajit says, Israel re-established the Hebrew language after the establishment of Israel? Why didn't we, India, re-establish Sanskrit as our official language instead of English after our independence? As it would have helped us solve our language problems and helped us understand our ancient religious, philosophical, spiritual, civilizational texts and connect with our own culture even more. Do you think there is any way to correct this mistake even now? In Gayatri Ingale says, you earlier said that Sanskrit should be made the official language of India and English should be eliminated completely. You've given the example of China and France that don't use English and they're still doing well. But French and Chinese are the official language at many international institutions, but India doesn't have that facility. So, in that way, in what way making Sanskrit the national language will affect India's performance at the global stage? You see, French was not always an official language in various international institutions. Chinese was not always an official language in many international institutions. This happened because the stature and relevance of these nations grew. India, until the last 5-10 years, has been an irrelevant nation. So that's why nobody uses any Indian language anywhere. Nobody wants to learn Hindi or any Indian language. When your nation starts becoming genuinely internationally relevant, everybody will start paying attention to you and giving importance to your culture and your language. So that's how French became established as the official language in many international institutions. That's how the same thing happened to Chinese, Arabic, and so on. And how did English become the international language? In 1800, French was more of an international language than English. How did it happen? Through imperialism and through the British Empire. So, to make your language accepted globally, you have to spread your roots. You have to spread your power projection abilities, and you have to you have to increase your relevance. You have to become a genuinely relevant nation. Then this happens. But you have to first have some self confidence that we will use our own language as the official language. That's what you need to do. You have to start that way, backwards. You don't say we will first become relevant, then we'll bring in Sanskrit. You start by becoming more confident in yourself, by having some self respect and having your own civilization language as the official national language. And then you grow. And everybody, if they want to interact with you, will have to learn your language. And because you're so powerful and now so well respected, everybody will make your language one of their official languages. That's how it works. Okay? So making Sanskrit the national language will make India more, will engender self-respect among Indians. It will also make people respect India more. Right now, we are speaking a foreign language. People laugh at us behind our backs. You may not realize it. Okay. So now that's the deal. Now about Hebrew and why didn't we re-establish Sanskrit? Because our leaders were all mentally colonized losers. Most of them, not all, most of them. So-called leaders, so-called founding fathers. I mean, there was some debate of making Sanskrit the national language, but they chose no. Hindi hoga, Hindi, for some reason. And yeah, English is also still one of the official languages, and people like me can speak English better than any native language, which is sad, right? So yes, I think there's still a way to correct this mistake. You can correct the whole thing in 20 years. You know, introduce Sanskrit at the education in the education system and make it the official language. You start with class 0, kindergarten. What is it called? Nursery. First year you introduce nursery, the official language. And Sanskrit is not like a foreign language that you do learn a foreign language first and all that. Sanskrit is part of our blood. Any Indian language has 50-60% Sanskrit vocabulary anyway. So introducing Sanskrit is not going to traumatize the kids at all. It's going to actually make them more intelligent and brighter and more connected to the roots. So introduce it 1 year at a time, first at the nursery level, then junior KG, senior KG, then first standard, second standard. And in 20 years, you've made the whole education system Sanskrit compliant, and that's how we do it. And it will take a leader of some fortitude to do this, because there's a lot of opposition to Sanskrit within India these days, especially when it comes to various NGOs and institutions that are connected to outside financial funds and the various conversion factories and missionary supported organizations and all that in India, and various third rate regional political parties that want to create divisions in India for their own political benefits. I'm not naming anybody, but I'm just saying. So, because of all these reasons, there's a lot of opposition to Sanskrit in India, in various parts of India. But it is our civilization language. It's been the only civilizational language of India at least 10,000 years. And we have to bring it back. I think it can be done if we have a leadership that has a bit of fortitude and maybe at the right time. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Off 3425 says, I'm 15 years old. My height is 5.5 feet. I want to be 6 feet tall. Suggest me exercises and diet for it. And Sayantan Biswas says, I'm currently 5'8". Height at the age of 19. I want to increase my height by 4 centimeters, so 6 feet. Yeah. As most of my peers are taller than me, should I undergo limb lengthening surgery? Okay, look, first of all, the first question. I'm 15, I want to be 6 feet tall. I'm 5.5 feet. So you got what? 7 inches to go. Suggest exercise and diet. I would suggest a very clean diet, lots of vegetables, and I don't know, 150, 100, 120 grams of protein per day. Depending on whether you're vegetarian or non-vegetarian, you would choose various sources. If you're a vegetarian, paneer is a great source. Paneer is a cottage cheese. It contains protein and a good amount of fat, and that would also be a good fuel source for you. If you don't eat paneer, then you can go for various pulses which come with a lot of carbohydrates. But okay, that's what vegetarians have to deal with. If you're non-vegetarian, then we have various meat-based sources, animal-based sources for protein. So you need to eat lots of vegetables and a good amount of protein every day. That's number one. That's diet. Exercises: go to the track, run, track and field, running, jumping, throwing, and contact sports, martial arts, boxing, or something like kabaddi or something. And also, if you have the time, go to gym and lift heavy weights. Start with light weights, please, otherwise you'll get injured. So that's what you do. You need to be active. I think the best activity for increasing your height is track and field, athletics, because that brings out your genetics and it gives your genetic potential. It brings out your full genetic potential. Running and jumping, essentially, that's what the body is designed to do. Now, to Sayant and Biswas, should I undergo limb lengthening surgery? Well, I would not recommend it. I would not recommend doing anything unnatural, because at the end of the day, how does it matter whether you are whatever your height is? 5'8" is not bad. It's okay. Look, everybody is dealt a certain set of cards. Your genetic lottery, whatever gifts the gods have given you. It is said that when before you are born, you choose all your attributes before you take birth. That's what some people say. My point is this: at the end of the day, what matters in life is what you make of life, not how tall it is, how tall you are, and how you look. Of course, that gives you some pleasure and all that, but at the end of the day, what you achieve in life and what you contribute to society and what impact you have is more important than than how many inches tall you are, feet and inches. Okay, so I would say I would really not advise you to undergo limb lengthening surgery. It's pretty traumatic. They first break your bones and then they lengthen it, and you will spend at least 6 months in a wheelchair. It's horrific. Why would you want to put yourself through the torture? Okay, if you have any issues with how you look, I would say 5'8" is not bad, but I will recommend clean up your diet and go to gym and lift weights. Do it for the next 2 years, and you will see a total transformation in your body. That's what I would say. So I would not recommend limb lengthening surgery by any means. But at the end of the day, it's your choice, because you're the person who gets to decide what you do in life. Okay. Do we have any other questions left? I think we are done. We are done. So now what we do is I will take a few questions from the live chat. I know many of you are there on the live chat. So please ask me some questions. I'll take maybe 3 or 4 questions from the live chat before we wrap up. Okay. Crew Wit says Scythians' genetic similarity lower than 10% with Iranian at the time. How can Scythians be Iranian with very low genetic connection and very different culture? You ask eminent linguistic experts, they will say that Scythian is classified as an Iranian language. Linguistics is a pseudoscience. It should be very scientific. It should be based on scientific rules, the way we had the rules of Panini for Sanskrit. Those are proper scientific and algorithmic and logical rules. Today, linguistics is a joke. So they will come up with any story to link something with something. Scythians are Iranians. Genetically, Scythians. I have not really seen studies of late what genetically they're like. Scythians were genetically very diverse because they ruled over such a vast area of Central Asia. They would have some Mongolic genes, some Hunnic genes, some European-ish genes, definitely Indian subcontinental genes, some Iranian genes, and some whatever else. Very diverse population. But the original Scythians, the ones who lived about, let's say, 4,000, 5,000 years before today, I would like to see their genetic studies. That would be more interesting. So, yeah. So today people can claim any nonsense. Even genetic studies are kind of dodgy these days. I mean, they will draw conclusions about India's genetic history based on genetic samples taken from outside the country, outside the subcontinent. So there's all kinds of nonsense going on these days. Become I've kind of become disinterested in this topic. I used to keep track of what was happening vis-a-vis the Aryan invasion, migration, tourism, picnic thing, but these days I'm not looking into it. But overall, yeah, I would say that the claim that Scythians are Iranian, the best I would say is that Scythians are Indo-Iranian, but actually they are of subcontinental origin. That's what I would say. Okay. Rohit Bide says you mentioned Kushan Shakas assimilated with quotes in the society, with Indian society, and became a part of Indian culture. How do you think this happened, considering they were invaders and like Abrahamic invaders? Think about it. When the Mauryan Empire expanded, they were also invaders, right? They conquered various parts of Western India, Southern India, Northern India. The Mauryans were also invaders. What happened? Did anything happen? Did anything happen? Nothing happened. These regions simply came under a new administration, new king, and they carried on with their lives. The taxation structure won't change much, lifestyle won't change much, no major change. Similarly, when the Kushans and the Shakas first came and conquered India, they would have fought with the various armies of the various Indian kings, defeated them, and then established their kingdom, and then nothing much changes. Nothing much changes for the Indian population. And then you would have some Scythians who would come and settle down in various parts of India, maybe, uh, and that also would have been reasonably harmonious because they had similar language and similar customs, politics, polytheistic culture, like you say, not Abrahamic invaders. So they did not attempt to impose a foreign ideology or religion or culture on the natives. Instead, they just simply assimilated. Means I will take some of your culture. Maybe you can take some of mine if you choose to. But yeah, let's live in peace. That's how it happened. Unfortunately, we have no texts left from those days. Everything was burned in the destruction of the great university. So we don't know what exactly happened. I am sure some people would have written about it, how these events happened, but we've lost it. But we know they assimilated because the genetics all mixed up. Okay. Bloodmonger says, is the US going to apply sanctions on India due to the recent news of India and Iran's deal on the Chabahar port, or is it just an intimidation tactic? I think they will not impose any sanctions, or if they impose some sanctions, it could be on some on some limited commercial interests and very limited sanctions. But yeah, it's a symbolic threat that we are bigger than you, we are stronger than you, we can do whatever the hell we want to you if we choose to. Remember that we have destroyed Iran, we have destroyed other nations just through sanctions, and we can do the same thing to you. So you better behave. It's an arm twisting tactic. It's an intimidation tactic. It's a bullying tactic. So I don't think they're actually going to impose any sanctions. If they do impose sanctions, those will not be very serious sanctions. There'll be limited sanctions, not on the whole country. But it's a tactic of intimidation, bullying, and arm twisting. That's what it is. All right, let us take maybe one more question. Shinky says, is carnivore diet good for Indians? Carnivore diet means you eat only meat. I don't know. Um, I think there are people in the West who sing praises of the carnivore diet. I think Joe Rogan has gone carnivore at times. I believe that this guy Jordan Peterson, eats only beef. How nice! How nice! In his daughter too, apparently. Look, to each their own. I would say. I don't know if carnivore diet is good for Indians. I don't think it's we are genetically predisposed for eating only meat. Yeah, we have our ancestors have lived on the subcontinent continent for about 75,000 years. And we are naturally adapted to the kind of vegetation and the kind of food sources we have on the subcontinent. So I don't think the carnivore diet is the right diet for Indians, but if you want to try it out, entirely your choice. Who's stopping you? Okay. A7 Blade says, Sir, take my question. Well, I don't see a question. I say that, what's your question? I don't see it. You should have put the question there. uh, Tejas says, is Manusmriti casteist? First of all, I haven't read the Manusmriti, and I don't think it's casteist. This term caste has been used as a stick to beat India with. Every society has a hierarchical structure. Every society has organization and division of labor. Even mice, like I said some time ago, they have structured societies. Without structure there is no functioning society. Without hierarchy there is no functioning society. Look at Apple, look at Microsoft, look at any functional corporation. There's a hierarchy and a command structure. Look at the armed forces, look at any functioning organization. There is hierarchy, and there is division of labor, and there is a command structure. And similarly with any society you're going to have it. But in the case of India, to demonize India, they've said this is caste system and it is evil, and there was no social mobility and all that blah 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 blah. So I'm just sick and tired of this crap. Absolute utter nonsense. But yeah, it's a good question, Tejas. I appreciate the question, but I don't think it's casteist. I totally disagree with this nonsense. Now, Maklevin says, recently a Pakistani woman had a heart transplant in India as Pakistanis don't donate organs. Why do we prioritize eliminations of our own people? Who are we trying to please? I It's a great question, Mr. Maklevin. A Pakistani girl, woman, whatever, she came to India. She was poor. She did not have resources. Somebody brought her into India, and someone transplanted an Indian heart into her. And she's gone back to Pakistan. She's going to live her life. There are lots of Indians who need hearts. There are lots of Indians who need various transplanted organs, kidneys and livers and spleens and eyes and whatnot. And there's a shortage of these organs. And you give a heart to a Pakistani. What on earth is this nonsense? I I just don't understand what this is. It's an enemy nation. They're not our people. They used to be. They no longer are our people. They're not our friends. They're our enemies. They wish us dead, and we are giving extremely precious and extremely scarce resources to them. What is this? This is utter madness. The organization that did this needs to be investigated. I hope the government is doing that. All right. I guess we are at the end of today's episode. Once again, 2 hours, almost 13 minutes. So, yeah, this is it. We end today's session over here. Next week again, I'm going to do 3 sessions. So I look forward to seeing you all in at that time. The first one will be either on Tuesday or Wednesday. I'll put out a notification, and it's going to be a live chat session, the next one. Okay, so I look forward to seeing you all there. Until then, thank you so much for all your questions. Apologies to those of you whose questions I could not take, but I'm going to do more of these live streams, so you will have more chances to hopefully have me answer your question. Please ask your best questions. I'll pick as many of them as I can. So until then, take care. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to keep raising your standards every single day. Thank you so much. See you next time.